So I'm here with James and Shari again as part of our ongoing conversation about Douglas Harding's book, Hierarchy of Heaven and Earth. We are discussing chapters 5 through 8 today. Does anyone have any overall thoughts about this section of the book that they'd like to share at the start?
I listened to that conversation with Karen and was it Richard Lang? Is that what it
Hmm.
is? Is that his
Yeah,
name? Did you listen to it?
yeah, I did.
So I cheated a little bit and went to that chapter of
I haven't.
the law of hierarchy,
Yeah.
which was really cool. But another chapter that really stood out to me in our readings here was chapter 6, the middle view.
Yes.
And it talked about really the different way of looking at the differences between life, animate and inanimate matter. And he talked about how considering that the stuff that we put on, our clothes, these different things are dead and we're alive. And let me see if I can find the quote here. It would be a good way to kind of introduce these ideas. Some part he says, if my wrist is in any sense more mine than my wristwatch, that is chiefly because I am always replacing it with dead material, whereas my watch needs more than occasional replacement of my parts. So he says that life is an organization of dead matter, and death is, dead matter is an organization of life. Like I forgot how he said it. I don't know if
I found that particular part salient. So I actually wrote on page 67 from that chapter. He says, to the objection that these things are dead, I reply that every dead thing is a disorganization of a living thing, and every living thing is an organization of dead things, which are nevertheless alive as a whole.
Mhm.
Presently, I shall drink some tea and put on my overcoat, and both will live in me.
Yeah. Yeah,
This
it's
is
right there.
just beautiful. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I was wonderful.
yeah.
And he goes on more talking about how he really gets into this spatial and temporal aspects of this. He says, to write this sentence, I have grown on my right hand a new kind of sixth finger, talking about the pen, which I shall amputate when I have done. And talks about sitting in a chair. I also have 6 legs like a fly, but unlike the fly, I shall leave 4 of them behind when I get up. Later on, he goes, and his growth, he's talking about man, is temporal no less than spatial. One of the chief novelties of the well-developed human body is the manner in which it incorporates time so that organs enter into temporal relationships of unique complexity. Here's a new order of anatomy, a physique that cannot be taken in at a glance, a time-developed creature of which the many-limbed gods of the East are a fitting diagram. And it says, thus my soup spoon hand, though coincidentally spatial with my dessert spoon hand, is removed from it by 20 minutes. And when at night, so it's like this, I was like, cool, man. He's just really going into this.
And it's really good because like in this chapter, like one of the primary focuses, first of all, the way he talks about like how man is able to transform himself through these technologies. First of all, it reminded me of like shamanic transformation. And then also, like, even though he wrote this in like the early 50s, it very much reminded me of like some of the things that that John Vervaeke says, like about like that connection with the way we use our technology as like an extension of our bodies.
Yeah.
And he also links it to that idea of shamanic transformation too. Just as Harding does, but Harding was writing this in like the 50s, and it was really just basing it, I mean, he was just basing it on just like taking his own like primary sense perception seriously, and also
Yeah.
looking about the way that we talk about things. Like one of the examples he uses is of like um uh when we say there goes a ship rather than there goes a man on a ship,
Yep.
you
Yep.
know. um and The fact that like the necessary letting go of these things in order to make room for like repeated transformations too.
Yeah. I
That
think
was
that
all really fascinating.
where he talked about the ship here, let me see if I can find it here. Where he talks about, when we see a ship, we see a man on a ship. Then he talks about
Yeah.
the alien life forms populating an alien planet, talking about like these cells within our bodies, right?
Right.
Let's see if I can find it, man. Let's see here. Yeah, the natural and the artificial. And there's so much in this one chapter. We could spend a couple hours just on this chapter here. There's so much to kind of look into. Do you have that where that was where he talked about the ship?
Let's see here. It is. Let's see. I remembered that one, but I didn't write it down. Let's see. That is going to be toward the
That's
beginning
on
of the
page
chapter.
68.
Yeah.
Oh, there you
I
go.
got it,
Sherry's
yeah.
got it.
Yeah. He says, and when you, I'll just get to this sentence at the end. Says,
Yeah, go ahead. I'll let you read it.
He says, we know yet contrive not to know that, see, I got to read a little bit more. Hold on. Let's see.
Yeah, no problem.
Maybe I'll read the whole paragraph real quick.
Yeah, go for it.
It says, there is then no reason for my observer to doubt his eyes, which show him a creature able to change its species to suit the occasion, on land, on and in the sea, and in the air. And after all, this way of looking at me is the natural one. The tools make the workman, because without them he is maimed, and the clothes make the man, because without them he is flayed. It is not done to see him as a live body in dead fabrics, to undress him with your eyes. And when you meet him at sea, you say, there goes a ship, not there go some men in a ship. Indeed, only the blind and deaf could suppose that man is the dominant creature in any of the elements. And here it is. He says, we know, yet contrive not to know, that they have been invaded by a new and terrible kingdom of non-human beings, beautiful and dangerous and exceedingly accomplished mesoforms, which might well be mistaken for the conquering armies of some utterly alien planet.
Yeah. I also like how he kind of I like how he uses this to show how later on, a little bit later on in the chapter, he used this to show how human artifice has to be viewed as part of nature. And there's a line, this is near the bottom of page 72, where he says that those are who are so fond of reminding us that nature, this is red in tooth and claw, should remember first that the stricture is her own, and second, that some of the claws have grown into hands, and some of the hands have grown into scalpels, and all the instruments of healing. But no wonder nature is heartless and brainless when directly we find in her any design or kindness, we call it unnatural instead of what it really is, doubly natural.
And he talks about the end of that process is a doctor having a scalpel doing surgery and healing.
Yes.
Right. So it makes me think of this, how our bodies heal themselves, right? You have a cut, and then you have these the leveraging of different platelets to heal yourself, right? To heal your cut. That's the same thing that's happening at this higher level, right? Where we have surgeons that create sutures, right? So it's like the humanity or as a whole healing itself through these specialized parts that are expressions of nature. So nature is not just red in tooth and claw. You can't reduce nature to being red in tooth and claw, because you have nature creating doctors with scalpels.
We actually kind of have to see ourselves as outside of the hierarchy and outside of nature in order to assume that standpoint, which is funny because actually even people who are hypercritical of humanity and go as far as to basically see man as a threat to a planet, in order to do that, the position that they're taking is outside of things.
Yep.
Basically, anytime you're assuming that objective observer viewpoint, whether you're aware of it or not, the viewpoint you're assuming is the divine viewpoint at the top of the hierarchy.
Yeah, it's transcendent. Yeah,
that's the only place that you could make that judgment from.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine, Shari.
Okay. I'm just wondering, this might be a really dumb question, but he's calling this the middle view. So we started, the first 4 chapters were the close view, right? Like the microcosm, or the inner cosmos. And this is the middle view. Can you help me understand why this is the middle view?
So it's
he
uses,
what is the middle view?
Right. So he uses this image of a pyramid, right? So at the bottom of the pyramid, at the pyramid is that absolute substratum, right? that empty nothing at the center is like the very bottom.
Mhm.
And as you go up the layers of the hierarchy, you're going further out. So like the middle, what he's calling the middle view is like basically like the realm of our normal like human experience, whereas like that lower view is like beneath the subatomic, like to the point of nothingness.
Okay, so the middle view is just our everyday interactions with the world around us.
Correct.
Yeah, he calls it the infrahuman, which is below our view, right? Inside of the cellular and the atomic and the subatomic, and then the human, which is this middle view, right? And then the suprahuman, which is the kind of the top of the pyramid, the kind of galactic or earthly or solar view, right? And this idea, it's like middle mediator. Man is mediator of heaven and earth, of heaven and earth. So the middle, the mediator, we are in between heaven and earth.
Right. And I see that same thing. Whether Harding intended it or not, it is kind of irrelevant, because it's still a valid view, because the text is the text is the text. And whatever your cultural influences are in coming up with something, they're there. And that Christian view of man as being the mediator between the upper and lower parts of the hierarchy are completely legitimate to read into that.
Well, I mean, that's just that pattern repeating itself again, right? Like that's that pattern of being. It just ends up, that's how it is, right? Like that's why Harding has to write it like that, because that is what reality is.
Because it is the pattern, right? Exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I actually like. This is a little bit of a sidetrack, but I watched Karen's video with Lang today, and I think like Lang's move is like he thinks that the discovery of the open awareness of the headless experience is kind of like the whole thing, and that's really the only important thing, and the rest of it kind of doesn't matter to him. But that's actually like, to me, that's just kind of that's like just sort of an obvious intuition, and is actually kind of just like a starting point of the content that I think is actually more important. That is important only in as much as it wakes you up into it. The importance of that is breaking you out of the objective scientific worldview. And that's the only importance of it. If you just stop at that, I mean, if you only take that, that can just dissolve into sort of like a solipsistic pantheism, like by itself.
Well, when you said that, that's it for him. And that, I mean, I've seen some of Lang's stuff on YouTube, and it seems like the New Age movement has grabbed onto Harding and ran with it, right?
Yeah, just the headless part, again, and that's it.
Just the headless part, yeah. But that again, that's to me my whole idea of what idolatry is. It's a stopping short, right?
It's a denial of the hierarchy.
At the thing and not, well, yeah, and you don't look past it iconically, right? You're not looking through the idea to see that pattern of being, which is what you pointed out just earlier, right? How that
right, and it's also ironically, here's the thing: is like Lang implies that you're actually like indulging and engaging in abstraction if you don't limit yourself to that. I would actually say that it's actually precisely the opposite, that you're guilty of like only clinging on to an abstraction and refusing the ontological implications of the broader scope of Harding's views. Like if you take them like seriously on an ontological level, then they are.
Yeah, but isn't Lang Buddhist?
Yeah, right.
So for Lang, it's nothingness. Right.
Well,
I don't know if I don't know. He said some things that he said the things toward the end like that. Like he may identify as Buddhist, but he said a couple things toward the end of that conversation that if you go and look at the comments, I pointed out that you really can only get from a Christian, like from a Trinitarian ontology. It's like you don't get to say those things without a Trinitarian ontology. Like you can't. There is no Buddhist ontology that actually manages to maintain a polar tension between unity and multiplicity and have non-identical repetition. You can't do it.
Yeah, he has a section in in that chapter. It's entitled "The Trinitarian Pairs," where he literally just talks about that. And then after that, I wanted to read from it, which it will inform the chapters that we're looking at. If we read this, it's a little bit long, but it's
no, go for it.
It's called analysis and synthesis, and he says,
what page?
Yeah, it's 142.
Okay.
Yeah. And he's talking about the pairs, and he talks about how the pairs of these different ideas, these worldviews, the scientific pair. So the molecular level is congruent with the earthly level, right? The atomic level is congruent with the solar level. So that's when he says pairs here, but that's not important to read this here. So he says, in religion, the infrahuman seeks its suprahuman counterpart. In science, the suprahuman seeks its infrahuman counterpart, and their joint business is the self-consciousness of the pairs in their living unity. He says, but for us now, the scientific attitude is altogether dominant, and the science whose function and knowledge are suprahuman is directed wholly upon the infrahuman and is incapable of recognizing anything else. It says, for directly science sees itself as the most important function of its infrahuman subject matter. It raises that subject matter to its own suprahuman position and takes its place below. In short, it becomes a species of theology. Science is thus essentially unconscious of itself in particular and of the suprahuman in general. Its proper business is accordingly to interpret the higher always in terms of the lower, the whole in terms of the part. To make intelligible is, for science, to degrade in rank and ideally to reduce everything to nothing at the center. Reality in the 20th century is inversely proportional to hierarchical status. And he says, we can believe in electrons that contrive a God, but not in a God that contrives electrons. And then, if you please, we call religious dogmas fantastic, as if, compared with us, Athanasius were not a hard-bitten skeptic. As if an accidental collection of atoms, eloquently and learnedly describing itself as such, were not a stranger God than any mumbo jumbo. Explanation is our polite term for cosmic trunk murder, but the smaller the dismembered part, the less it comprehends the whole, or is itself comprehensible, until we reach the absolutely incomprehensible center, which comprehends all. So there he's talking about this, this kind of how we're stuck in this particular view, and we're thinking it's ultimate in a sense, right? And it's looking at the superhuman, right? It's trying to experience the superhuman, the transcendent, through observing the infrahuman, and it's, again, we're focused on one level, the truth, right? The analytical, the scientific, in not in context of the other levels. And in this chapter, he talks about how, you have theology and philosophy, and then you have these different specializations that go to, physics, biology, sociology, right? And each of them is disconnected. And Karen talked about this is kind of what's leading to this idea of gender being socially constructed, right? So gender is not rooted into the biology, right? It's just stuck in this social construct. But he's saying that you need to integrate all of the levels at their root, which is a theological, philosophical thing. So sociology and psychology are rooted in biology, which is rooted, in physics, which ultimately goes into natural philosophy, which is ultimately rooted in philosophy and theology, right? So he's like reincorporating all of these worldviews instead of being stuck on the narrow scientific kind of worldview,
Right.
Yeah. Well, the best part there, James, is the last chapter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. And Karen said that she's read the last few chapters first, and I would advise doing that as well. Like that's what I did. And I read the last 3 chapters really first, and then started going through the book. And the last 3 chapters, you didn't need the context of the headless perspective to understand what he's saying there. And it's kind of like this chimera, or not chimera, this kind of starting at the end in a sense, and then working your way back. It really makes it a lot more palatable to read the first few chapters.
Well,
Okay.
I think the headless perspective is still important. So I think
Yeah.
that okay. So I think Lang is wrong in like emphasizing that to the detriment of everything else. But the reason why that headless perspective is important is that it teaches you it is trying to teach you the proper way of seeing.
Yep. No, I agree, but I think that from starting at the end there, it was more palatable. It was more easier to enter into
Right.
this logic of the headless perspective, which
That,
it's very
yeah.
intuitive once you get into it, right? It's like
Right.
we don't experience life within the 8 inches between this dark skull here. Like we don't see
Yeah.
like
Right.
these tubes
So
coming out,
right,
right?
and
So
I disagreed with what
yeah.
this is. I very much disagree with what Lang's assessment of like Lewis wasn't interested in the experience. No, I just think Lewis thought it was an obvious intuition and like
Mhm.
Yeah.
one like
Yeah.
not the core of the book. Like it not.
Yeah.
I mean, it is an important. You couldn't have the book wouldn't hold together without it. Let me be clear about that. It's not unimportant,
Mhm.
but it is like it is the rest of the rest of it is important too, because here's the thing with just that open awareness piece alone doesn't give you like throughout this book. Harding clearly has a sense of the importance, the ontological importance of participation and relation.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
without that sense of the importance of participation and relation, and how participation and relation is how the hierarchy is structured, then you don't get all the goods.
Yeah.
You're missing the thing that actually makes it literally hold all together. You're
Yeah.
missing the bonds between like the different centers of awareness, the thing that makes the Trinitarian ontology that makes the non-identical repetition of the divine image possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So throughout the layers.
It's that which unifies the multiplicities at each hierarchical level, right?
Correct.
And if you're stuck at one, it degrades the hierarchy and it leads to corruption, I'd say. And this is a kind of different way of thinking of, right, what leads this this idea of power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. What is this? I had this idea of Christ inverts the pyramid scheme. A pyramid scheme is where you have to take advantage of those below in the pyramid, right, in order for the resources to be channeled upwards, right? It's like Christ inverts that, right, in a sense, and kind of balances that. And then I think the idea of man as mediator is that we are in this middle path, and we are meant to connect through participation the superhuman, right, the beatific vision, beauty, and the true through the good, in a sense, right? Christ was sinless, right? And he talks about, like, in the Middle Ages, we got super focused on the good, morality, and then in the Enlightenment we got super focused on the true, the particulars, and the scientific worldview. And I love when he says we just need to reverse the process, given the innovations and insights that we have, and then reincorporate the good into the true, and then ultimately the beautiful, which is the whole, right, into its parts, and kind of reset the pyramid, reset the hierarchy, and appreciate it, in a sense. Yes, it's very very Christian. I think he appreciates. He was born a Christian, and he was early in his life.
Well, Shari can speak to that because he actually comes out of the same religious background as Shari.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, he was. Did you watch that little documentary on him that Richard Lang did? At all?
Parts of it. I saw parts of it.
Well, I mean, he starts right at the beginning with his growing up as Plymouth Brethren, and I just know, because that's the denomination that my parents got saved into, and so I know a little bit about it. And I told Nate this recently, that when I found out he was Plymouth Brethren, I knew precisely why he ended up taking this journey.
Yeah, and I also know why, even though the entire structure of what he's doing it's inescapably Christian. You really can't, like, I don't care if he wrote a book about comparative religion and the truth that can be found in other religions. Like, first of all, that kind of perennialism is actually only possible for a Christian. You can't even possibly see that if you're not a Christian. And every non-Christian scholar who makes that argument is completely relying on a Christian framework to make the argument.
Yeah.
Like, you literally cannot make that except from a Christian standpoint. So it's still fundamentally Christian. And I think that the reason that he doesn't care about, he basically is like, let's just cut through all the nonsense propositions, and I'm just going to try to help people see that this is the structure of reality, because the propositions don't matter. So he's clearly he's a universalist, because that's why he cannot care about the propositions. That's why he can just care about like getting people to see the structure of reality as it is. And the Christian claim has always been, this is true because this conforms to the structure of reality. This is how being is structured. This is the way it is.
Yeah.
Right.
And
that's not because we have the best arguments.
But it situates, that view situates even the propositions appropriately. So
correct.
The propositions are important, but they are made manifest appropriately in the hierarchy. So it's like, it puts it into order, right? Whereas you don't disregard them, but you just make them more, mediated appropriately.
But sense. you don't need to understand them or know them at all. They don't actually matter. What matters is whether you are able to come to a point where you are, when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, he is calling you into an ontic pattern. Like it's a mode of being.
Yep.
And if you learn to see that mode of being and to live into that mode of being, then it doesn't matter how you got there.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Okay, so that's kind of what I was going to say, like regarding his religious upbringing. His religious upbringing dictated only one way to get there, right? And so when because he got shunned by his parents because he expressed doubt or whatever, and his doubt wasn't necessarily in God, it was in the structure of their religion.
Yes.
Because this man is obviously interested in structure, right? And so he looked at that structure and he said that structure is not coherent, right? And it doesn't include everything. And it has to include everything, otherwise it isn't God, because why would God not include everything? He made everything, right?
Yeah. Right.
So, and I know these questions, okay? I know these questions because I had those questions coming out of that same mindset. Can you
double click a bit on that worldview or that religious perspective, as I'm not familiar with it? So some insights into his, I guess, religious upbringing.
Yeah, share it with us, Shari.
It's rather exclusive. So it's very Calvinist in that there are the elect and the unelect, right? There are people born to be saved and people born to be damned, literally. Okay, so like they don't even have a chance, right? So there's two groups of this sect. One is called open brethren, the other is closed. Closed brethren are they don't even preach in public in case someone who is not elect hears it and gets saved. Like, figure that out. I don't know.
Wow.
So that's the closed group, and then there's the open brethren, and all that really means is that they commune with each other. And then another interesting aspect of the brethren is that they are mostly businessmen, and they host lots of businessmen meetings, Christian businessmen's associations, and they're very interconnected in the community, right? So there's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of money involved. It's iconoclastic. It's very patriarchal. Women are not allowed to speak. They have to keep their heads covered, all that kind of stuff, right? So, and if you're swimming with everybody in the same, in the same direction, it's a wonderful place to be. But as soon as you go, wait a minute, then it's not so much fun anymore.
Which Harding clearly was incapable of not doing.
Right, and he was in the documentary. He was shunned by his parents. They never spoke to him again, which is very brethren, and they cut him off from his inheritance.
What is it called? So Plymouth Brethren? Plymouth Brethren? Is that what? Is that what? Yeah. Where is that documentary? Is that on YouTube?
It's on YouTube, and Ryan Long does it.
Okay, I have to look
Or
it up.
Richard Lang. Sorry.
Richard Lang.
Okay.
Yeah, I made the same mistake. I made the same mistake a few weeks ago. It's okay.
What? Who is Ryan Long anyway?
He's a comedian.
Oh yeah, he's hilarious actually.
Yeah. But I've made don't feel bad because I've made the same mistake. Yeah, Richard Lang, not Ryan Long.
So what I wanted to say, because Nate went on a good rant there and he hit right on it, is that to Douglas Harding, you know, he had to know what that hierarchy of heaven and earth was, okay? In order to understand where he was standing in the world, why he was disowned and disinherited.
Right.
He needed to know this, you guys. Okay? And once he understood it, he realized he didn't need to preach it.
Right, because he was committed, right, because he was committed to entering into it experientially. Which is the point.
Yeah.
Like that's why the propositions exist, to get you to enter into it into that way. And I think like what Harding is doing is he's just like, I'm going to open this up. I'm going to open this treasure up to people who might not otherwise be able to receive this treasure, by just cutting out the propositions and helping them see the pattern.
Yeah.
Because if you're able to see the pattern,
imagine...
Go ahead, Shari.
Sorry.
No,
please. I think we got a bit of a lag. Just imagine growing up where people that you possibly really loved were not included in the afterlife. Just imagine what that would feel like to somebody.
It would make you allergic to propositionalism. It would absolutely make you allergic to it, which explains why he's like, he doesn't couch what he's doing in propositional terms. So Lang's assumption that that there's not something fundamentally Christian about what he's doing because he rejects doing it in a propositional way is just a really narrow vision. It's a really narrow vision. And what he's doing is completely philosophically and culturally dependent on a Christian frame. You couldn't do it otherwise.
Yeah.
But you said it earlier, Nate. It does to Harding. It doesn't even matter.
Right. It doesn't matter
if Lang gets it wrong. Okay.
Right.
Because
it doesn't. Is he wrong though? Is he wrong? Is he wrong to think that?
Well, who's wrong? I mean, how can you be wrong? You know. I'm sorry if that sounds really like. Maybe I should rewind that.
Yeah. Well, it's like it's very Pageauian, right? The book, right? Like it's observing the patterns, right? I guess you could be like, to sin is to miss the mark. The mark is found in the patterns, right? The patterns are what exists, and you could have a more or less more fidelity to that pattern or less in every part of your life, in a sense. So, but that could be But that can be taken to a sense of excluded, highly exclusion. Like I think like you're talking about here, like we have from a Gnostic perspective, like we have this secret knowledge, right? Yep. We have the secret to the fundamental pattern of the world, and we want to keep that. And then there are people that can understand it and people that can't, and those people are saved, and the other ones are fodder.
This is one of the real beauties of what Harding's doing. It is fundamentally completely anti-Gnostic, because he's not saying it's a secret at all. He's not saying, he's like saying like, all this is just a matter of like just trusting your awareness and looking at the world and participating and being in relation, and you'll see it.
Yeah.
So just on that note, there's this is in chapter 5 actually, like, which is the last chapter on the close view. I just love this part. He says, here are the key and keyhole and door in one, the central emptiness, which is the key of the kingdom, the keyhole which leads to wonderland, the needle's eye, which is the gate of heaven. Through this point of entry, I am in all the world, and all the world is in me. And if having entered, I am capable of many things, it is because capability means room. If I am a thinking reed, it is because reed like I am coreless, cogito ergo non sum. And common sense forever trying to salvage some miserable chattel for me only breaks the conditions of that universal policy of insurance whereby unlimited compensation is given to those who lose all.
Wow. Lots of biblical undertones there, right? The path to the kingdom is narrow, right?
Yeah.
He even uses a needle, kind of a needle. What page was that on?
That's on page 59. Page 59. I would say that what that passage is, this is what Christ means when he says the kingdom of God is within you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And this is what the idea of that God is, that God is both totally transcendent and more intimate to you than you are to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And is the only thing, and is the source of your very identity. Like that's the other thing that Lang ended up saying toward the end of that conversation is like he pointed that Harding was talking about a path of ego redemption as opposed to ego death, which is the Eastern path. So I don't know if he could, I don't know if he could really, how he could be Buddhist if he's saying that, because that idea that the path is egoic redemption as opposed to ego death, that is Christian. That is a fundamentally Christian notion. That is like the notion that our I am is to be redeemed and brought in harmony with the eternal I am, and that our ability to even say the words I am are only because of our derivation from that divine source.
Yeah, I posted this meme on Facebook of Christ's transfiguration, and I wrote, "Don't kill your ego, transfigure it."
Yeah, right? I saw that. I saw that. I was thinking of this Harding passage when I saw that you posted that.
Yeah, that's like
yes, that's so right. That is exactly right, James. That's the difference. This is the difference. This is why I didn't become a Buddhist, right? This is why, because I like serious, like Christians who seriously think are also non-dualists, but they're non-dualists in such a way that rather than flattening out reality into just unity, they keep unity and multiplicity and polar tension, and they recover the notion of the person.
They preserve
and that is recovered because of participation and relation. Participation and relation are the things that keep unity and multiplicity in tension, which is why you need a Trinitarian ontology to accomplish that. You have to have Trinity in order to do that. And the reason you can do that is if God is a person, right? And God is definitely not a person in the Eastern view. In the Christian view, God is a person. A personal being is a person. A person is a relational being by its nature, which implies that God is not simple unity, that God himself is also a polar tension between unity and multiplicity. He is both one and three.
So was God a person?
And that structure goes all through reality.
So the Buddha wasn't wrong, right? He was writing that the ultimate suffering comes from human desire, right? Was God a person prior to the incarnation?
Was God a person prior to the incarnation? I would say that yes, because if you talk to a religious Orthodox Jewish rabbi, Jews definitely also have very much a sense that God is a person. In fact, I know. Have you ever seen? There's a Hasidic rabbi, Manis Friedman, who I really like, who has a lot of really insightful things to say. But Manis Friedman really emphasizes strongly that personhood of God, to the point that he says that no, monotheism is not the invention of Judaism. Like monotheism has roots that go back that are independent of Judaism. It's not monotheism that is Judaism's innovations. It's the notion that monotheistic deity is a person that calls you into relationship with him. That's the Judaic innovation. And I would say what the Christian revelation brings is the understanding that I would say that it's always implicit. I think that you can find the Trinity in the Old Testament. I think it was always there. Robert Jensen is a Lutheran theologian who makes some really good Old Testament based arguments for that. But I would say that philosophically, the minute that you've said that God is a person, God can no longer just be unity, because to be a person automatically always implies relation. Who was the Shari? You shared me a video from an Orthodox theologian who was talking on that theme the other day. Do you remember who that was? James might be interested in that.
What was the thing? What was the name of the video? What was
Well, he was talking about he was commenting on like on Hildebrand.
Oh,
and he was talking about like a personhood. John Zazoulis. That's who it was. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you remember what the title of that particular video? Because I love that because that's what I'm always on about.
Yeah.
That's the thing I keep hammering: relation.
Yeah. And he wrote a book called Being as Communion.
Yes. That's it. Yes. And that makes sense too, because that's exactly why. Because of course being is communion, because God is a communion.
Mm-hmm. How could it? It's a communion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask James, and this is totally not, has nothing to do with Harding, but you have to ask the question, what is before the incarnation? When Revelation says that Jesus was slain, the Lamb was slain before the foundation of the world, right? So,
yeah.
I mean, John Bear gets into all of this.
You're getting into spoilers for our Emil Bach conversation.
So does that mean that he was slain before the beginning of the world? Is that the beginning of our world in terms of the fall of Adam and Eve? Right.
So James, I'll okay. We're gonna get into this in detail tomorrow. We're actually. Oh, by the way, Shari, I'm gonna have to probably move the time for that because I forgot I have an optometrist appointment, so we might have to start like an hour later. But I've been reading Emil Bach's book on the Apocalypse of St. John, and and he actually reads the vision of the Lamb in Revelation chapter 4 as actually a New Testament version of the creation story. Wow. So it is the Lamb slain before the foundation of the world that makes possible the creation period. And basically what he's putting forth is that this is how I've been talking about the idea. Creation itself is always a kenotic sacrificial movement. That's the nature of creation, and we can actually understand that by thinking about like our own creative endeavors. Like when we're really in the flow, when we're doing something that's creative, some kind of creative expression, or even if it's like anything that we're doing where we're just kind of like, we can experience this complete like emptying and loss of ourself, where we just become absorbed and something is flowing through us in that process.
Well, you said it best, Nate. You said it best when you said it's getting out of your own way, right?
Right. Correct.
It's like say you're writing a song or a poem or a book or I don't know, some artistic creative expression of something. And as soon as you stop manipulating and wielding it, right? As soon as you just get out of its way and let it be born. Even playing baseball or softball, right? Like I used to play baseball and I still play softball, right? And it's like when I'm like really hitting well, it's like there's no thought involved in that. I'm just like it's just a flow.
So it's getting the idea.
You completely get out of the way of yourself, and you're just letting like something flow through you.
But it's still yourself, right? So it's getting the idea of yourself out of the way, right?
Correct.
Getting the idea of yourself out of the way.
Correct.
To preserve the unity.
Correct.
So this idea of this kind of flashed up when the idea of this self-emptying of God, right? So the non-duality, the unity of the Trinity, right, empties itself and creates creation, right, which is necessarily separation. In a sense, right? This self-emptying into the world, which creates multiplicity, right? But it's not ultimately disconnected from the ultimate unity, but it is in a sense, right? Like you have kids, right? And that is a self-emptying. Like you essentially, and I was talking about this somebody, you sacrifice your kids to the world because you bring them into the world knowing that they will suffer and die,
Well, that's the
Right.
perfect
Yeah.
thing to point to, because the nature of that force that creates the universe, it's agape. That's what it
Mhm.
is.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
is that only predicated of like one portion of the Trinity? No, it applies to all members of the Trinity.
Mhm.
But it is through that it is through that action that it occurs.
Mhm. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, that could open up a whole another space to
That's a
explore
really
there.
big
Yeah.
space.
Yeah, well,
That's
I think we'll probably end up talking about that for an extended time tomorrow.
Yeah.
I'm betting.
Who was that author you said? Was it?
It's Emil Bock. It's EMIL and then BOCK. He's I read a book of a review that Owen Barfield wrote of the text, and then decided that I was going to read it, and then Shari and Michael have been reading it with me, and we've been discussing it. So
Is he a Orthodox Jew or
he's not. So Bach is actually he's one of the founders of the Christian community, which is like it's a mystical Christian
Gnostic.
sect, yeah, kind of quasi-Gnostic sect that's like inspired by Rudolf Steiner.
okay?
But I was interested in his text because he's reading the Apocalypse of John symbolically,
Mm.
Yeah.
which I think is the
Yeah.
appropriate way to read the text.
And he
Yeah,
has some
might be
pretty
the only
good
way. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Really, the only way.
Yeah.
Have you read that text like and absorbed it in any meaningful way?
So
Just-
I read it a lot growing up, but that was in a Pentecostal context, and it tends to approach the text in this like really broken, silly, literal fashion. So that's
Mhm.
actually one of the reasons I was motivated to do this, is like, okay, now that like I have come back to faith in this very different way from the faith that I grew up in, like I don't think that the Pentecostals are wrong that this text is important.
Mhm.
And I want to come back to this text and try to read it in a different way that is more focused on reading it symbolically. And so far, it's been a pretty productive effort. Like, for example, like one of the things that we talked about in our first discussion was how in Pentecostal circles, there's like an obsession of like trying to figure out like what particular moment in history this is talking about.
Mhm.
And what Bach says is like, no. This is the way of reading how the supersensible spiritual realm affects history at any time and at any place.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. Like,
it's always the pattern of how the supersensible is affecting.
It's always already
the sensible.
eschatology. It's always
Right.
already the end times, right? Where it's this echo that reverberates through history.
Right. So the right way to read it is always to view it as the end times, because you know what? You're mortal. You're going to die. It is the end times for you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know what's interesting? I don't know, James, if you're aware of this, but in the Orthodox Church, so my priest was explaining this to us because we went through the Bible, like the different books and how the Bible's put together in the Orthodox Church. And we got to Revelation. He said, he was saying one day that the book of Revelation is never read in the liturgy, ever.
Yeah.
Never read from the book of Revelation. But he said, but when you walk into the building, you're walking into the book of Revelation.
Wow.
The architecture, the lampstands, the throne, everything is modeled after the cosmic liturgy. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then he said, my priest said that when people in his parish come up to him and say, I can't make it to church on Sunday, he's like, oh my God, why not? It's the end of the world. Right? You're going to be the end of the world.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's so great. Yeah, that is. It's always, yes.
It's always the end of the world, but it's always the beginning of something new. Right.
Right.
And that's also what I really appreciate about Orthodoxy is that everything is spoken of in the present tense. Mm-hmm. It's not Christ has risen, it's Christ is risen, right? Yeah. And it's always now. It's now. And that's what Revelation is in the Orthodox Church. It's now.
Yeah.
It's right now.
And during Pascha, you participate in the resurrection.
Yeah.
Well, it's a participation heavy tradition, and it's very beautiful. And I'm very jealous of your liturgy for sure.
Yeah.
Especially since I'm a big, like, music is very central to the way
Nate,
I
there's
process.
lots of room.
Yeah.
It's like the idea that God was.
I think it'll probably inevitably happen someday, Shari.
So the revelation is so God was slain as the lamb, and in the revelation he is comes back in his glory, right? And what do you have at the apex of the dome is the Christ in his glory, in a sense. So it's kind of this, kind of this completion that works itself through history, right? And it's happens at the individual level, but it's also happening through history as the church is dying, in a sense, which is a good thing, because after death is the resurrection. So you see the fragmenting and disintegration of the church into 50,000 denominations, right? And now this kind of the fruits of the Enlightenment are boring out, right? Where it's the death of the church, which leads to its resurrection, which I kind of see as revelation as being the resurrection of the church, in a sense, like Christ's resurrection was of the body. But they all interpenetrate and relate with each other. But there is a historical exigencies that we're experiencing and living in, right? So there is a historical time that reflects the resurrection. I mean, that reflects the revelation, just as your life ends, which is your world, right? The history has an end point, like an actual eschatology. So it's a both and thing, right?
That's right.
Yes, it is.
Right.
Well, like it's like this. It's like this structure, right? It's the way reality. It's fractal. You just keep seeing it everywhere, and to me, like in my personal life, it's because of that. It's because of seeing these patterns over and over and everywhere that I know that God is real, because God is screaming that he is real, right? He's just repeating himself, like, ad nauseum. Right?
Let me ask, let's get back to Harding really quick here. So jumping off what you just said, Shari, it's like, how would you recommend Harding's book to someone who has a hard time just seeing that, like,
no,
there's more to the pattern of so you wouldn't?
No, I don't. I mean, I guess it would depend on the individual, but I think it's kind of the proverbial casting pearls before swine. Not that I think it's a waste of time, but I think it's just what Christ meant when he said that was just, it's not doing anything, right? Like, people have to be ready for this kind of thing. I think, like, they need to be ready to.
I think Harding hoped that he could. I don't know that I disagree with you, though. That I think ultimately, I don't know that, like, someone who is still, like, very stuck in although I don't know. I mean, I haven't really listened to Lang's talk with Sam Harris, so I'm wondering what Sam Harris gets out of this.
Well, it would depend.
I'm sure it's just like this sort of, like, solipsistic open awareness and nothing else. I'm pretty sure.
Well, I think a way to access it from a materials perspective is like, hey, you're into mathematics and geometry, and you're into Terence McKenna talking about the infinite adumbrations, right? The fractal pattern of reality that you see, the tree reflected in the leaf, and you see this fractal pattern reflected in our lungs, and the veins and the capillaries and the arteries in our body look like the rivers, and there is this patterning that we can observe in the physical world, right? Why wouldn't there be this patterning that happens in our human or in our consciousness, in a sense, right? That scales up. But from a materials perspective, it's just this kind of like infinite regress of patterns kind of repeating themselves. But in the human space, right, in the human realm, in human consciousness, the pattern is Christ. That is the fractal pattern, right? And it has, an origin and a destination, and it fills both levels, in a sense, right? So I think that's an entry point.
Yeah, like I think the reason for that, like what you were describing there from the materialist perspective, the pattern seems only to go down because they're at the top of the hierarchy, right?
Yeah, your gaze, revert your gaze. You know,
right.
look up, just look up.
The scientific vision requires that. Like you can't, like that's the entire process of like, okay, I'm going to be an objective observer now. Like,
well, they do realize that they're mediators. They're mediating heaven and earth. They're in between.
Yeah.
And well, not only that, as this is the thing that like, and I don't know if like reading Harding would like, they would probably just think it was nonsense, but Harding like very clearly points out like that like everything also has a subjective viewpoint. There's like, you know, the atom might have like a really simple, primitive, idiotic awareness, but it still has an awareness.
There is something it's like to be an atom, right? Just like there is something it's like to be a molecule, and kind of all the way up. Yeah. And it reminds me of, have you heard of the law of one, the raw material? Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Oh man, it's so there was this lady in the 70s who was put into a trance, kind of like a deep trance, and she would channel this being called Ra, right? And she was very biblical. She had the Bible open to certain passages while she was going through these kind of regressions, and they documented 7 books of this being Ra, right, talking through this lady, and you have recordings of it, and it's really slow, and the rich physics that is being described there, and it talks about the levels of awareness, the richness of the levels of awareness start at the elemental level. So you have a certain quality of awareness at the fire, earth, stone, right? Minerals have a certain awareness, right? So, but they have less awareness than plants, right? Plants they move more, they move towards the sun, right? So you have these levels of awareness that are coming into existence that are richer and more transcendent, right? So the animals transcendent include the plant awareness. So an animal, a dog, right, has more awareness than a plant, which has more awareness than a mineral, right? And then you come to the human, right, is where self-awareness comes into being, right? So this levels of awareness, they scale up into the human, and it actually talks about the superhuman, and Ra is and it talks about the densities. You know, the first density is mineral, the second density is plant, third density is animal awareness, and then in between the third and the fourth density, you have human awareness, and then humans are ascending into the fourth density, and it goes to the fifth, the sixth, and the seventh, and then it repeats at the eighth, right? It doesn't repeat, like that is the section of densities and dimensions. We live within these densities and dimensions, and the movement of awareness, the evolution of consciousness. So you are a conscious being that starts as a spark that moves into the mineral, that moves into the plant, that moves into the animal, then higher animals, and then finally humans, right? And then it's a mixture of a hodgepodge of a lot of new age stuff. And it talks about the chakras, right? The chakra is the lowest level, the lowest density. Then you have the second level, which is sex, primal emotions. And then the third density, you get into kind of this idea of the self, the ego. And then the fourth density, which is the heart, right? Which is the Christ consciousness, which is Christ. And Christ unites the bottom 3 chakras and the top 3 chakras, right? They're reunited in between. But that was something that I was very interested in. It's a very sophisticated epistemology. I would suggest looking at it. It's very interesting, but it reminded me of this idea of that there is something that it's like to be an atom. All right. And there's something that it's like to be a molecule, but the molecule transcends and includes the atom, right? The cell transcends and includes the molecule. So that awareness, that lower level of awareness is included and transcendent. And there's this constant repetition of transcending and including all the way up, right? So now we're at the human level, and we're at that middle view, but there are levels above us, right? If we transcend and include the human perspective, is it something like powers and principalities? What would that look like? But that's something that came to mind. It was something I was really interested in before. But the way that the recordings, I do think it was channeled, and I do think there is, the claim was that this was Ra from the Egyptian Ra, right? That was coming to impart this knowledge at this particular time, and it's something interested to explore. I suggest just checking out a little bit. And there's a huge repository that you can search on the internet. So if you look up LL Research, the Law of One, you can search all different densities and the different laws in each density, and how, like the idea of is like we have dogs and we name them and we love them, and us naming and loving our dogs, right, increases the maturity and the movement of their soul to move up towards the love that is human beings. So it's got reincarnation in it and whatnot. So it's this very kind of new age thing, but I think there's
there's
interesting
some
exploring.
Yeah, I know there's there's kind of like some intersection with like Jewish mysticism there.
Yeah, big time. Yeah,
because it's certainly an idea in Jewish mysticism that like part of the process of Olam Haba is that actual like man's role in like raising up the rest of materiality.
Yeah.
Like that's what the mediating, that's what we're doing in our, so you can there's some parts of that you can actually like legitimately work into the Judeo-Christian tradition that certainly would have been ideas that Jesus was aware of.
Yep. Yeah,
for
I
sure,
think so
because
too.
they existed in the they certainly existed within the Second Temple Jewish imaginary. Like that was a thought that would have been around.
And it's
and I
good to
also
explore,
think, and I also think that you can actually argue for that. I can actually think you can make a scriptural argument for that being the picture that's being given too. I actually think that like the kind of like that like post-Reformation dominion idea of our role is actually a huge mistake, and it's actually tied to this objective movement and scientific vision too. These things are happening historically at the same time. At the same time that we're developing like this objective scientific vision that gives us all this power, we're also developing this notion of like our rightful dominion over nature. And we can see what the consequences of that thinking have been in our world. Like it's actually, yes, we have authority, but but the authority that we have is to act as proper mediators. And we're supposed to be as Christians, we're supposed to be acting in love.
Caretakers.
And caretakers, exactly. We're not supposed we're not supposed to be dominating and controlling. That's like there's nothing Christian about that.
That is the entry of the adversary, right? The adversary is power for its sake, right?
Correct.
Like when the fall happened, the serpent wasn't wrong, saying, "Hey, just eat this apple, you'll be like gods," right? And we did become like God in terms of the knowledge, but not in terms of the wisdom and the spiritual maturity. And that is the fruits of that is our fallen world that we see here. But it's not like it's not wrong; it's incomplete. And just to go like we were talking about how science abstracts itself as the observer and then creates experiments. But even quantum mechanics, right, tells you now that the observer affects the experiment, right? Whether a particle goes through the slit, that whole like whether the particle that's shot through two slits, right, whether or not it's observed as a wave or a particle determines on the observer. So, have you seen that? And
then also like, panpsychism is being taken more and more seriously too. And it's like here, Harding in his book, he's writing a view that is effectively panpsychist.
Yeah, but like, panpsychism isn't. It's not wrong. It's incomplete.
Right, exactly.
Like,
exactly.
It's a big difference.
No, actually, I think it's important. It's like a step on the right path because because all of a sudden it's like. It forces you to stop looking at everything as an object, right? Because now all of a sudden everything has a view out, which if we take that seriously would change our moral behavior.
Yeah, 100%.
There's no way that couldn't impact us if we take it seriously.
Yeah.
I was just thinking that, like, oh man, I've had so many thoughts just listening to you guys talk here, but one thing that years and years ago, I had a dream that I was at the judgment seat of God and I could only see his feet. And I was standing there, right? And I was kind of like, all right, lay it on me. I can take it. Right. And I could, because I'm that kind of person, like just, okay, go for it. And then I heard this coughing and I turned around and there were billions of people behind me, just as far as you could see. And suddenly I got scared and I said, are they all going to be listening? And God said, of course, everything that's ever happened to you has happened to them.
Wow.
Okay, so now you're bringing me back to Harding, because there's like
Yeah.
I think this is the bottom of page. This is in chapter 7, the distant view, where he's talking about humanity, and
What
he's
page?
and what he's talking about, he's talking about how there is also within, it's at bottom of page 81 is where it starts.
Okay.
And then it goes over into page 82. And so he's talking about in this chapter that basically what he's talking about is like that sort of like polar tension between unity and multiplicity between man and mankind, right? Or man and humankind. And he says,
this is hang on a minute, Nate. I just wanted to make one point. The reason I mentioned that was because you were saying that once you know, if you take panpsychism real seriously, then you are compelled to have a moral responsibility to everything, right? And that was what terrified me the most in my dream, was suddenly I had a moral responsibility. It is
terrifying,
right? I could God raining wrath down on me, right?
Right.
But I couldn't handle the moral responsibility of all the things that I had done affecting all those people behind me.
Yeah, and it does too. I like it. Like, I mean, if we had, I mean, right. Yeah. I mean, which is what it means to live in a fallen state. Like, right. if you were to take seriously, like the potential repercussions of like even the smallest, like some of the smallest barely intentional actions that you've engaged in, like, and if you could actually see what the rippling repercussive effects of those were, of course it would terrify you. So
yeah, but this was
fear of God, right?
Right.
This
yeah.
is more significant than that, like from the dream, everything that happened.
I'm getting there. Shari, because your dream is what made me think of this passage. So he says, we need most those we understand least. Well may we, though unbelievers, deplore the doubts of believers. Those sinners be shocked when the good fall. Though anti-clerical freethinkers be secretly disturbed at the decline in church attendance. The wise are the custodians of our sagacity, the virtuous of our merit, the brave of our courage, the beautiful and gracious and captivating of all that we own in them. We are no good without our betters. All our stupidity is want of sympathy. All our weakness is want of cooperation. Our self-sufficiency is suicidal. For living is loving. In some, all lack is lack of others. We spend our lives forgetting that there is only one man. So that's why you were there at the judgment seat, Shari. That's why there were billions behind you.
Yeah, they are you.
Yes.
In a sense.
That's right. And also just think about that. That is written by a man who was shunned and disinherited by believers, by religious people, right? This is his cry. When I read this, I hear him saying, how could you do this? You don't know what you're doing.
Right. So right. So you tell me, so you tell me who was in a real sense taking more seriously the commandment to love God and love their neighbor. Harding, when he wrote that, or the Plymouth Brethren who shunned him. Yeah. Because he wouldn't assent to the same abstracted propositions that they held.
Yeah, and what you do to the least of us, you do to all of us, right? And it's like, try to scale this down into the infrahuman, right? Like, in order for your body to exist, right, you have to have cells that cooperate, engage, and love each other. If that doesn't happen in one part of the body, cancer, right, the body dies. Right. So you need all of the organs, the cells functioning as a whole through love, through cooperation, through communing with each other to have the identity of Nate or Shari or James.
Right.
That scales up.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's also, Harding says that at one point, Harding actually says that like that principle of like proper relationality and harmony is the thing that causes ascent up the hierarchy. Like that's the thing that causes hierarchical ascent, which I would relate to that notion I was talking about like the role of man as mediator to help bring everything else, to help raise it up the hierarchy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, yeah, and he writes about that in that chapter as well.
Also, doesn't there also need to be a coming down as a mediator? Like if you're mediating between heaven and earth, there's going up and a coming down, right?
Well, we can't. We actually can't do anything. We couldn't do anything except for the fact that Christ has come down for us. That's what allows us to That's what allows us to re-enter into that role again, because we broke off. I mean, that's what we lost. That's what the fall cut us off from. We cut ourselves off from that role as mediator.
And he went all the way down. He went to the bottom of the hierarchy. He went
redeemed
to
the
hell.
entire hierarchy. This is why I'm a universalist. I don't see any other way of see any other way of reading that. It's like that's what the descent into hell means. It means going all the way down to the very bottom and restoring the entire thing. And it's already happened, and yet it's yet to happen.
Can I read at the same time? Can I read this? This is kind of what I meant to read. So this is
go for it.
In between this page 140. So I read analysis and synthesis. Before that is the Trinitarian pairs. Before that is the macrocosm and microcosm. And it reads here, as man, I bisect all the pairs and their linking process, for I include inferior members of every pair, but I am included in the superior member. I am at home in the upper half of the hierarchy because I am the lower half. To use more familiar language in man, the microcosm reflects the macrocosm, a doctrine which in its many forms is as ancient as it is universal. And it is generally implied that man's business is to recognize and restore the links between what is above and what is below, between the universe without and the universe within. That is to say, while man is man because he cuts the hierarchy in half, his office is to heal that wound, to restore the unity of the pairs, and so to realize himself as much more and much less than man. His task is to reseat the suprahuman rider on the infrahuman horse, to join ruler and ruled, to realize that the ancestral cave and the ancestral mountain imply each other, to link the 9 circles of hell with the 9 circles of heaven, to reunite the rising branches of the universe tree with its deepening roots, and so to regain his own balance. The common sensible part man, who is only human, and the scientific part man who finds himself only in the bottom half of the hierarchy, and the religious part man who finds himself only in the top half, all three need to be conjoined in the symmetrical and vertical man who is whole because his universe is whole. Such, more or less, is the suggestion of a long esoteric tradition of the experience of mystics and poets in every time and country, and of much psychological analysis. And he goes on, but I mean, that's it in a nutshell, right?
Yeah.
To join the micro and the macro.
That's it.
Yeah. That's the pattern.
I hadn't read that part of the book yet, but like somehow I got that as naturally following from what he was already saying.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I said that this part of the book kind of incorporates and reflects the previous part. So it is this fractal, like, right? It's this higher level that incorporates the previous parts of the book. And what he's talking about there is he is hitting on a fundamental pattern of being. And he's saying that it's been expressed by poets and philosophers and whatnot, in a sense, right? And this is what's actualized in Christ, right? Christ shows this to us. Like, we don't have to theorize anymore. Like, it's shown to us, and it's communicated to us through love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. If you do that, right, you will heal the rift in the hierarchy. You will invert the pyramid scheme, and you will restore order, and therefore the kingdom of heaven is at hand, right?
Well, yeah, that's what we were talking about yesterday, Nate, in that chat, was the laying, like I was trying to explain to Jess about laying, if you lay down your life for another, and they lay down their life for you, and that it just gets, it's infinite, right? That movement becomes infinite. That is what loving is. Loving is laying down your life. There is no other way to love someone. If you love someone, you will lay down your life. You will put them first.
That's right? The idea of a man, a woman submitting to the man is a reciprocal relationship. And the man is sacrificing himself, his identity, to his family and his wife, right? And the wife and the family support, and the husband informs and provides meaning, just like the body, the head, provides meaning, informs. You literally take food in and inform the body. It's this reciprocal relationship that has been diverted. And what we've seen in the 20th century and in families in general, and you see like you say this to a woman in general, that the woman is supposed to submit to a man. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, because the man has become a tyrant because he's not sacrificing himself for his family, right? I am a tyrant because I still have, echoes of that, no matter how hard I try, right? But think about families in the 100 years ago, or even in Roman times, man. The husband was literally a little tyrant who could sacrifice the kids, literally kill the kids if they wanted to. Like, the term exposition comes from the Roman practice of taking a child and putting him outside the walls of the town, right, or of the city, and just letting them go. Like, selling children into slavery was a norm. Women wouldn't even cry about it. Somebody was talking about this. They said that Christianity invented the idea of children, right? Children were thought of as plants.
Certainly, the idea of childhood.
Yeah.
Childhood, I would say. Certainly there was an idea of children, but there was no idea of childhood before Christianity.
Yep.
Which is why this kind of hits on what I was talking about before, about how, like, you can from the Christian standpoint, you can look back at other religions and develop and you can have this perennialist frame, but you can't. That is not, before the Christian revelation, that is not a move that is possible to make. You just can't, because that wasn't the structure of reality before Christianity.
That's why it says that Christianity is the religion that's not a religion, or the religion that ends religion, right? Because Vervaeke always talks about he's developing a religion that's not a religion.
Already here.
Dude, it's already here. Like,
right. It's the religion that is not dependent on your cultural structure. It is the religion that offers a complete replacement for your cultural structure, because your cultural structure is a messed up hierarchy that is operating on principles that are opposite from the principles of God. Christianity offers a properly structured hierarchy that is actually based on the opposite principles of the one that you're wanting to cling to.
So devil's advocate in the real, right? So how come you've had priests that molest children? How come you've had the institutions of the church at all levels has been corrupted? So how could this system that you're talking about is the ultimate reality, which it did not protect itself from the ultimate corruption that we see in governmental institutions, businesses, corporations? This has infected the church as well. How could you say that your system that is ultimate reality, but it can't ward off against the very thing that the postmodernists critique beautifully? They're critiquing power for its sake and corruption. How could this ultimate reality allow corruption to enter? Like, I'm not saying this for me.
Right. It's the subversion of Christianity by a spirit of conformity that decides that it's more important to be aligned with the hierarchical forces of this world. It's making devil's bargains with princes.
So Vervaeke,
and Catholics have done it, and Orthodox have done it, and the Protestants have done it. This is like Jacques Ellul talks about this a lot in The Subversion of Christianity. Like, and he's fundamentally right. I mean, that's what it is. It's this accepting the rewards of conformity to the ways of this world instead of being in alignment with the divine hierarchical model, which is actually complete rejection of those principles. A refusal to take "thou shalt not kill" seriously, a refusal to take "love your enemy" seriously, because those things are very hard to do. It's really hard to live in this world taking those things with the utmost seriousness.
So let's say
I have the utmost compassion and understanding for people who made these bargains, because you have to live in this world, and it's tough. And and you're not going to ever be able to enact those principles perfectly in this world, but we still have to be making the effort.
And like Vervaeke would say, that's what I'm trying to do with my religion. That's not a religion. Can we, but I think it comes down to,
why does he think he would succeed where the church has failed?
Right. Well, because he's still using, you wanted the knowledge of good and evil, humans. Okay. So don't ask why corruption infiltrates your world when, you're not, if we were complete, if we would have listened to God and communed with him, ate from the tree of life, right, then we could probably organize things as such where, things would flourish, right? But we didn't do that, right? The goal is to get back there, right? The goal is to, and you can't do it though. You need grace. You can't do it on your own. That's the whole, there's the rub, man. I'm just trying to think.
Right. But the church does have a tendency to fall into this conformity that is not good enough. And as it is, I think it is the job of the laity to hold their church hierarchy in account for that, and to demand that they be making a more serious effort to actually like implement that model, and yet at the same time be gracious and understand that that they are also sinners and are also going to fail and are also going to fall short. But I do think there is a role for the church to play in the movement that will create the conditions for the second coming. I think that the church is an active participant in that process and needs to be willing to pick up that challenge and to try to meet that challenge, and to take the gospel of Jesus as seriously as the gospel about Jesus. I think that's really been the problem, is like most churches have tended to emphasize the gospel about Jesus at the expense of the gospel of Jesus, because the gospel of Jesus was very clearly like, the kingdom's here, live into it.
Yeah, that's theosis, right? Deification.
Right, and we need to be trying to build communities that are at least attempting to conform to that, rather than conform to the hierarchies and the principalities and the powers of this world, which is what all the churches have done this. It's like no church is innocent of that charge.
Yep,
they've all done it.
That we talked about this too the other day, that you can't know love without suffering, right? You can't know metanoia without sin. Like, you cannot know what repentance is without sin. Like, I know it's probably very like I'm walking a fine line here, but there's no way to accomplish the task at hand without the world that we live in and the problem that we are.
Yeah.
Right.
There's this quote that I'm going to butcher here a bit, but it's like, if we would have stayed in commune with God, right, we would have known evil as a well person knows sickness, but instead we know goodness as a well person. I forgot what it was. I knew I'd butcher it, but it's like this economy.
As a sick person knows wellness.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. Where's that quote from? Do you know?
I don't know, but that's really good.
Yeah.
Really good.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay. I need to, this was really great. I need to wrap up. So thank you, James and Shari, for joining me today as we discussed hierarchy of heaven and earth. And then next time, do you want to just go ahead and do the rest of the book, or is that too much? You want to break it up?
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot, but we can go in and out of the book like we have here.
Okay.
Or we can take one chapter or something. I'm good with like the same format. So
you want to do another 4 chapters then, and do like chapters 9 through 12?
Yeah, that's good. Or like, isn't there sections? Like, let's do section.
Yeah, there's
there's now what?
We have.
There's the distant view. Did we get into that?
Yeah, we stopped at.
We started on the distant view. We got to life. We actually never talked about life. Yeah. But that's like we did talk around it without specifically mentioning the text.
We could do the rest of this part.
Do the finished part 2, which would be 9 through 12, which is what I was suggesting, and that would put us at. And then we can go ahead and do maybe part 3, part 4, etc. Separately. So
we could just spend some time talking about that one chapter or a couple chapters in part 3, because that's where it gets into that the chapter which that chapter incorporates the whole entire book.
Do you want to skip ahead and to do part 3 for the next discussion possibly, or do you want to keep in order?
No, let's keep it like this. I want to.
Okay.
I haven't read
All right.
those chapters, and this
All
will
right.
kind of give me the
Okay.
impetus. So,
All
awesome.
right. So we'll
Thank
do
you,
the
guys.
rest of. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you both very
Yeah.
much. I really, really appreciate it.
Cool. Thank you, guys. Bye,
Yeah, I love
Shari.
it. Thank you.
I hope. Hey, we got to still set up our.